Hey, Chris, you want to hear a joke?
Hit me.
So a man walks into a doctor's office, says he needs a cure for his depression. He's like, Doc, I'm feeling awful. Nothing I do is making this go away, you know? And the doctor suggests to him, the great clown Pagliacci is in town. Why don't you go see him? He'll cheer you right up. And the guy turns to him and starts crying and says, but Doc, I am the great clown Pagliacci. Good joke. Roll on snare. Everybody laughs.
I like it.
Now, which character in the original Watchmen comic said that? That's your bit of trivia for the day.
That I won't know because I literally crammed that thing in for this episode.
That was the wrong thing to do. Hey, the one thing I will say is that if you'd read it when I first recommended it to you 2 years ago, you know.
I did. I just forgot it.
Oh, okay. That makes
sense.
I've
consumed so much content.
There's a reason
since
why
then.
I reread at least a certain set of books at least once every year. So
I also do that, but that's not. It's unfortunately not on my list, and we can get into how I feel about the comic in regards to the show, and how I sort of have different opinions on both of those things. But first, before we get into anything, Dom, what are we doing today? Who are we?
Well, I was
about
to say, we kind of jumped the gun there. We haven't introduced ourselves yet, but it is I.
It was a good cold open, like Watchmen.
It was yeah. So we're already giving it away. Yeah, so I am the movie nerd. I'm back with my co-pilot, my faithful co-producer, co-everything, Chris Ivanko.
Hi, guys.
And we got to find a nickname for
Chris
you.
here. I just happy to be here. No, I like just being the dry
Chris?
guy. Yeah, I'm just Chris.
I don't know, I've got the movie nerd, but that's been my thing though for a while. So
fine. We'll think of something. I don't want to do it on air because nothing witty's coming to me. So, don't I think the show we're about to talk about did so well. It didn't force anything. And so because of that, it felt natural and amazing. So we'll just let it come to us.
Definitely.
You know what I'm saying?
And I feel like those initial criticisms should already set up the guys. We found one. We finally got something that Chris actually likes. That's not like something fun from over the summer. Chris.
Yeah, true.
What are we reviewing today?
Today, we are reviewing a show that completely blew my mind and took me for a ride. So we're talking about David Lindelof, Alan Moore's Watchmen on Talkin TV.
Whoa, whoops. Got the wrong thing. Talkin TV. Yeah,
that's
an
HBO show, but we're talking about it on Talkin TV. I'm just trying to be because this show is so
super smooth. That was great. That was perfect comedic timing right there. That's what that was.
The thing is, this show is just so on brand with the subtitles being in the Watchmen font and the episode title cards being in the Watchmen font.
So I want to just title cards first and how badass those are. This show is so good. Spoiler alert, but this show is so fucking good that the title cards are some of the most badass things I've ever seen.
It's
awesome.
Just super creative, and to be honest with you, I don't know if anyone else could pull that style off because usually it really annoys me when title cards are sort of propped up graphics in a shot, but it really didn't take away anything, and sometimes it kind of added a second layer of thought.
Yeah, these are the first title cards that I've seen. We've gotten some badass TV intros. In the past couple of years, but this is the first one that it doesn't need an intro because just those title cards have a story in and of itself. So I feel like we should start by prefacing exactly what it is that Watchmen, this specific Watchmen series that we have on HBO is, because for the longest time,
until I realized what was going on, I was very confused. But then that's why I'm glad I read the comic. I'm glad you were really on me to read the comic because
you need it. Because the marketing didn't want to lean too heavily on that fact because they didn't want to drive a wedge like a lot of movies do. It's you have to be caught up on this book before you watch the movie. They didn't want to go that route because movie studios are usually very afraid to do that. HBO didn't harp on it, which was the smart move, but it becomes very apparent once you get into the overall thing of the show. Let's just get this right out of the way, Chris. This is a show. It is a sequel, like I originally suspected. I had a lot of suspicions about this going in, that this was going to be a sequel. Whether it directly adapted Doomsday Clock, I was wary about because I'm A, Doomsday Clock is still too recent, and B, I feel like that's too much IP that HBO doesn't have access to yet, even though it's all under the Warner umbrella, is about to be folded into HBO Max. But so this is definitively a sequel to the original 1985 Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons comic extravaganza masterpiece.
Let me raise a caveat to that too, though. But don't let that deter you if you're someone who hasn't read the comic.
Exactly.
Because Lindelof has even said in multiple interviews, multiple late night appearances that I've watched on YouTube, trying to get as much information as I can about the creative process behind the show. Because, guys, that's how good it is. You're going to want to learn everything you can about it. Go check out Pedopedia, which is a very cool ARG campaign that HBO launched, which is brilliant. That's a side note. I want people to know about that. But Lindelof said it's just a a continuation. You don't have to watch the comic to enjoy and get the full effect from this, but obviously you're going to miss a level of intricacy and detail if you haven't read the comic. So that's on you. But you can enjoy it both ways, which is another amazing thing about this show.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because it's definitely because I was trying to think of the situation because the thing I always go to with shows and whether I think they're going to succeed or not is this a show that maybe not with its first season, maybe not even with its second season, but eventually my parents are going to want to watch together. And I'm thinking that once a show hits that level, you know, I'm talking a new show, not like a show that's like on for like a couple years that they watch. I'm talking a new hit show. If they get to that level where even my parents are into it, then what's it called? Then I know that it's that. So that it's gonna be the next big thing.
And are your parents into it?
Well, that's the thing, because I explained to them because I explained to them what I was watching. You know, I'm watching this new show, Watchmen, because they do like to talk to me about shows. It helps I'm the only kid left in the house now, but they do talk to me about like new shows and stuff, and I recommend them stuff, and they usually don't go for it because they like a lot of stuff that's different than what I like, but. I explained to them this because the whole thing is that they never read the book. They were unfamiliar with the movie. They didn't want to watch it when it first came out. They didn't really understand it. Like I feel like a lot of people who hadn't read the book when the original movie came out said, and they didn't really get it. And so I kind of had to explain to them, and they were kind of like, yeah, so it's Captain America: Civil War. I'm like, yeah, but no, because again, that's just the brainwashing power of Marvel and what the power of it has over the zeitgeist. But how that fast forwards to the show is. This is just such a unique show. Like, that's first and foremost.
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of skipped ahead over like a few
No, that's fine.
But
while we're talking about like introductions to the IP of Watchmen, I do have something to say before we
definitely. I was just going to ask, like, Chris, what's your history with Watchmen? I'm talking even before you met me, even.
Yeah, so I found out about Watchmen in the same era of my life that I met you, but it's certainly, if you're not in the fold, it's certainly one of the more obscure titles in the superhero genre, which we know obviously is more than just Marvel and DC. If you look at Umbrella Academy and The Boys and, of course, Watchmen, there are other superhero stories that sort of take the genre and spin it a different way.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, again, we can thank the streaming services for that because streaming services, how they've succeeded is taking all these niche properties that studios, for the most part, laughed at and making them these giant things that are, to me at least, more socially relevant than most of the movies we're getting.
Yeah, I think streaming has given a voice to what we would call in the 90s the voiceless. If you didn't have a good sales pitch, if you couldn't go in there and sort of win your spec script, have your spec script win people over, or your pitch win people over, your show wasn't getting off the ground. Now there's so many more outlets to produce amazing shows like this one, like Amazon picked up The Boys, Netflix picked up Umbrella Academy. So the superhero genre isn't just limited to the major motion picture, Marvel or DC anymore, but I was actually not even introduced to The Watchmen through the movie. Of course, it was like I had heard about it when it happened. I was a little too young. I remember I sat down to watch it, and it just was a little over my head. I stopped watching it halfway through. It was just a little confusing. So then,
you would have been, what, 94? So you would have been, what, 14, 15 when that movie came out? Because it came out in 2009.
I just wasn't, like, it wasn't the kind of superhero that I wanted to sit through as, like, a 14, 15-year-old. It was just too thought-provoking for me to really care about. Like, I that's not what I wanted from my superheroes at that point in my life. And so that's sort of why I never really gravitated towards it until in college when I took a literary class and it was assigned reading, and so I had to read it, and I was like, wait, we're reading about superheroes right now? And then they're like, yeah, and if you don't have this book, you can go to the bookstore and buy it. And I was like, wait, I'm buying a comic book from my bookstore? And the professor's like, no, this is a novel, a graphic novel. So that is how impactful this IP specifically is. It has permeated through, not only has it breached a level of intellectual, prowess that most other superhero shows haven't, but it's being taught in universities. And so,
yeah, in fact, my kind of reintroduction, like I'd gotten into Watchmen a little bit previously. It's one of the what I liked about it is it was one of those properties that it took me a while to both get into, and once I was into it, I understood, because the thing is that I didn't read the comic until after I watched the movie, because the movie, again, it was pulling a Zack Snyder, and again, when you're 13, 14, 15 years old, and you see a Zack Snyder movie, forget, you know what, I shouldn't even say the movie, the trailer, because I will admit, the trailer for Watchmen, without any knowledge of what the comic is, or what the property is, or anything like that, the trailer for that comic makes that movie look like one of the most badass things ever. And obviously it's not, but it's funny because the thing that the Snyder movie got the most heavily criticized about, and I like the movie fine enough, but again, this is one of those things where it's like, I can't ignore this because this is a genuine fact, because tonally he goes the complete opposite of the comic, because the comic is all about superhero deconstruction to the point where it literally blatantly portrays most of its characters as just unlikable, awful people, versus the movie, which juxtaposes that with these crazy, over-the-top, super sped up and then slowed down, highly choreographed, Matrix-like action sequences, and to an ending that, in a way, is kind of smarter, but almost by accident, than the ending that we get in the original comic. But so
I've heard that. I can't speak to it because I like I said, I sort of tuned out during the film. But what I can say is that, like, yeah, this was a little over my head the first time around, and I think that you can enjoy this show, but it's one of those shows that, like, you need to focus on it. But it's not hard to focus once you give it a chance and
definitely
let it in, because
it is
then
one
you're
of
just
those...
so consumed by it. But so there, I feel like there has always been, at least in my world, my scope, a lot of people who try it out and then quickly shy away from it. But it's one of those things like a fine wine, like you have to grow a taste for it. You have to give it a chance. And once you do, wow, it's a whirlwind.
Yeah, definitely. And I found that getting into the comic, watched the movie a few times. I found the director's cut, which I found to be much better than the theatrical cut. I didn't hate the theatrical cut, but I watched the director's cut, enjoyed it a lot. Watched it multiple times, read the comic a few times, liked it, didn't love it. Took a comic book class my last semester of school where I read both that and another comic that of which I'm sure we will end up discussing on a later date. Mm-hmm. But got to read that again for the entire middle of my semester. That was an awesome class. Loved everything I read in it. And that one, it's like, I think that was the moment where I realized kind of being in a class, studying it the way I would have like a novel back in high school, but breaking down and dissecting it and finally understanding what it was that made the novel so important. Like, not only just to the comic book world, but to the world in general. Again, it's like you said, it's a comic book. And it is a comic. Let's not delude ourselves. They can say graphic novel, but it is, because it is, yes, one continuing story, but we've seen like continuing one-off miniseries in comic books before. I would still consider it a comic book, but it's just, it's groundbreaking in the sense that it makes you aware, like I said, again, of certain characters. So kind of to backtrack and how that relates in it. So if you don't mind, I'd actually like to kind of like get into the plot of the show and kind of discuss like how it is that the show relates so much to the comic and why the show stands out both as a successful follow-up to the novel and probably its most worthwhile follow-up like ever out of all the follow-ups that we've gotten so far, but also kind of how just the world it reflects again, it continues what the original Watchmen was doing so well and continuing so well. So
yeah, I think we're there now. I think that we've painted sort of enough of a picture because I think you need the context because this is sort of, I don't know any other comic that's being taught in the classroom that's not just specifically a comic book class.
Right.
Like this was taught to me in your standard 101, 102 college core curriculum. So I think that's important to understand. Yeah. But now let's discuss and dissect what we've come here to talk about, the TV show adaptation of Alan Moore's Watchmen.
Yeah, definitely. So the interesting thing about it is that the show without the thing I like about the opening so much is that it's one of those shows that tells you immediately what it's going to be about without telling you immediately what it's going to be about, because we open up in the middle of an event in American history that is largely forgotten, I would say. In a weird way, I'm actually kind of shocked. Like, even going back to what's it called? 7th and 8th grade history class, which I believe is where I heard about it the most.
It hadn't been taught to me thoroughly in the classroom. At least not enough to leave such an impact.
1921, the Black Wall Street, again, they call it Black Wall Street, but it's really a massacre. It's the massacre of 1921 when the KKK launched, at least from what it appeared to be, launched this massive attack on the. I don't remember if it was, again, because I don't want to comment on it because I don't know it, because I don't feel well educated enough on it.
And I think that further articulates how important this show is and what they're trying to say about this event, because we both don't have, we both went to different high schools and we both don't have a solid background on this incident.
Like literally
it was glossed
nothing.
over in a sense.
But what I like about it is that it's not trying to like harp a certain lesson on you. It's literally open as a backdrop.
Yep, I'd
for
agree.
this one for this one character who later on is revealed to be one of the primary characters, I would say. And we see this little black kid watching this movie theater. It's an old black and white movie about a character, I believe it was Bass Reeves. And again, how it roots kind of in a way, continuing what the show is about, rooting its origin, the origins of superheroes themselves back in cinema. So even that is already breaking boundaries. So we see this one black kid, he's in a theater, the massacre's going on outside, his parents get him out of there. The whole reason why he's there, he explains, is because his mom, back in, this was the 20s, so black and white era of filmmaking, played, what they would do is they would have the film playing, but the films would have no sound. And so they would literally have somebody playing the piano in the theater, like a live performance. And so you see this little black kid and his mom, who is the piano player in this instance, getting rushed outside by a guy, run to a wagon, typical like underground railroad scene. They're passing the papers, whatever, begging, don't care, leave us, just take our son, And then and you just see like this wagon racing out as you just see like probably one of the most horrific acts of violence that I've seen like on screen just yet. And this is before we even get into the main event of the actual world itself, because the comic, the rest of the show takes place primarily in 2019, takes place 34 years after the comic, but right away in the pilot, it sets up, it still does take place. And the interesting thing too is that it also makes the very opposite choice of not taking place in a major city. It goes, and it's still in Tulsa almost 100 years after the original incident. And we open on Regina King and the current world that we are living in, which is, again, how they use the incident in order to set up this world is even more fascinating in and of itself, where it's a world where the cops have been forced to put on masks in order to protect their identities from this terrorist organization called the 7th Cavalry that has seemingly been formed in the wake of, again, this is our first hint that's connecting us to the original comic, Rorschach's journal being discovered by the New Frontier at the end of the original comic, and assumingly being read by this crew and inciting this crazy, like, white race riot, as supposedly.
But to that point, and I just want to, like, articulate to anyone who, doesn't understand like the impact, because I think you're doing a great job describing it. Like, yes, it's 100 years later, and it's the reason why it hit me so hard as to the fact that they stayed in Tulsa, because at first I was like, okay, well, why are we still here? But then you quickly realize because not much has changed at all. The players have changed, but the game is still the same.
The players, the sides, the stakes of what's at stake has changed, but the overall, like, that inner struggle, that, like, has pretty much remained the same.
And you're going to think, okay, cool, that wasn't, like, that deep. I could have gotten that, like, wow, like, great commentary. But no, it's important to say that because it's, you want to, you hear from, like, politicians nowadays, like, oh, we're working so hard to change things. We're doing all we can, but you never focus on a place like Oklahoma, right? We're always hearing about like the coasts or the
big property of anything that you heard that took place in the Midwest, let alone Oklahoma.
Right. We're always hearing about like the big swing states, but you're never focused on like, the other side of the story. And that's why I think this does such a beautiful job of creating a dichotomy that is like, inescapably important and compelling the entirety of the series. So Dom, we're talking about the Cavalry and how they sort of came in, and you were painting a great picture for us. So please resume. I just needed to let everyone know that really hit me, and that's when I knew I was all in. I knew I was all in from the first freaking like part of the first episode, guys. That's how incredible this is.
Right. Well, the other thing too is, like I said, before I get into the rest of kind of breaking down the pilot, what I love also is that Lindelof, just in the first episode alone, again, I gotta give credit to Lindelof where it is due, because I was one of those guys, again, I know Lost is one of your favorite shows ever. I only made it through the first 3 seasons, but I liked what I saw. I've heard Leftovers is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but this is really my first major experience outside of the movies, because again, my only real experience with Lindelof has been the 2 absolute god-awful screenplays that he helped write, which I don't blame him one bit for, because he really didn't get to stretch his muscles at all. But this shit right here, what he does, paying tribute to one of the greatest things that I've ever read, making it his own, and continuing it in such interesting ways that continue to expand upon the world. Like, he literally, so much of this is show don't tell, but in a way that feels like it's expanding. Like, I literally feel like I'm dropped in the middle of a world. Like after 2 opening sequences before we even get to Regina King and kind of establishing her thing, before you get into her character, like the Squid Falls. Like, I watched something And I see fucking all of a sudden they got to stop because there's daily weather alerts in order to protect them from mini falling squids. How that ties back into the comic. The 7 cavalry was already cool enough, but that was only the thing I'm like, okay, I think I can understand how this could happen, and this is kind of cool, but I need to see a little bit more, just like, oh, Rorschach unintentionally inspired a extreme right-wing, racist group that's basically the KKK reborn. Okay, I need to see a little bit more something there. And even what they do with that, as revealed later on, is to be revealed to be super interesting, especially how that ties into everything. So, Chris, there's a million different things that we could break down about here because there's so much shit that happens, not only in the pilot, but in the rest of the show. But I guess my question to you are, because we spent 20 minutes so far in this podcast, and I don't know quite how long you want to go for this. I'm willing to go all night. But what are your thoughts on Watchmen, HBO?
Yeah, so I think like a reason why it's been 20 minutes, because it surely has not felt like it's been 20 minutes, is because it's just this show used eggs as the analogy, but I think that was the wrong food, because to me it was an onion, in the sense that no matter how much you peel back, there's just another amazing layer to throw in your dish to enhance it, and it just keeps going. And so that's why I think it's so hard to dive in. But you know what? To answer your question, I'll dive in. I really liked it, man. I thought it was pretty on point, because one of the things that I really found myself thinking was, how are they going to top next week's episode? I mean, how is next week's episode going to top what we just saw, right? And it did time and time again. And even though that B story of I can never say his name right,
Ozymandias.
Ozymandias.
You can just call him Adrian, like everyone else did. Like, literally, no joke. Watchmen is one of the few comic properties where I prefer calling them by their real names than I do their superhero names, with the exception of Rorschach.
Yeah, that's a mouthful to say.
Yeah, that's a whole thing in and of itself.
But yeah, so even though the whole B story of Adrian took a little while to unfold and to sort of come into play, and for him to become really a key character in that climax, that finale sequence, I didn't care. I could have just watched him fucking around on that moon, and that could have just been it, because even the little things in this show are so perfect. The match cuts, man, the way that they were able to say a word, and then you're like, oh, okay, that was the last word, and now they're panning somewhere, but oh my god, they pan from that word to the physical object or the sky, and like just the way everything matched and lined up, the thought in this filmmaking. I need to watch this again. Like I told you, I'm going to watch this again literally next week, because it's that good, because every podcast and every commentator that I've seen about it said they had to watch this multiple times. And why? Because if you love film, and if you love attention to detail, and if you're just tired of people shitting things out because everyone seems to be getting their project funded and everyone seems to be getting things off the ground, well, this is not that project. Lindelof turned this thing down 2 times before he eventually was like, well, I don't want to see someone else make it, so I don't want to pass on this. And you can tell that he really put his heart and soul into this. Like, you talk about soul in filmmaking a lot, and to be honest with you, as someone who's a little new to critiquing and analyzing film, right, I'm more of a music guy, so I can recognize soul in music in a fucking blink of an eye. But I think, like, this is a lesson in what soul is in filmmaking, because I clearly recognize the passion, the TLC that was put into this, and that's why I think it's so hard to talk to get into it and break it down, because where do you start? It's
exactly. It's good. Just like the original comic. It is a maze in and of itself. But I'll tell you the first thing that immediately stood out to me.
I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question,
that's
man.
Fine.
I'm just so enamored by
this. That's fine, and that's good. Again, it provides for more interesting conversation. But I'll tell you the minute that this hooked me, because I'm a big guy. Like I said, you're a big guy about music and recognizing technicals, and that's good and all. But my whole thing, I've said this time and time again. They could be the prettiest looking piece of shit in the world, but at the end of the day, a piece of shit is a piece of shit.
Star Wars?
That's a whole bag in and of itself. And I'd like to go at least one episode without actually having to talk extensively about Disney.
I'm sorry.
But is that what this series, all 9 episodes too, does so brilliantly is that it is a sequel while simultaneously retconning the structure of the original novel, using certain of its new characters as placeholders, substitutes for characters from the original, and that doesn't bother me one little bit. If anything, it helps enhance it and make this so great.
Elaborate.
I literally looked at, so to picture this way, I'm looking at the plot structure and how it sets up and builds to each of its major events. Not necessarily to a T. It's not a direct mock-up. It's not the Snyder movie, which again, beat for beat, like almost a perfect adaptation, with the exception of changing the ending. But like, I'm looking at certain character beats and character traces, and obviously, like I said, they're not all the same. They're not all the same. Starting with obviously the fact of first, that unlike I'll tell you the first thing. Unlike the original comic, this has a lead focused character because even though Rorschach is your primary narrative character through most of it, he's not the main character, and they do a good job of like breaking up and really getting into that ensemble and breaking it down because there's a large portion of that novel where he's just not around. And this, unlike that, has a very clear-cut protagonist. Regina King, from the minute that she is introduced, they pull a little bit of a Fargo where they don't introduce your protagonist until they've set up the world, which I like, but she is very clearly your front and center. The other cast members are slowly, progressively introduced throughout the course of the first 3 episodes. Majority of the cast is introduced in the first episode. You got Don Johnson, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, Tim Blake Nelson, couple other minor side characters that I thought were going to play bigger parts, but they ended up as
like Red Scare
background character. Like Andrew Howard as Red Scare, Jacob Ming Trent as Panda.
I would have loved
Angela
more
and her
Panda.
husband Cal's kids, who immediately off the bat you're like, why again, just another great facet. Well, black parents raising 3 white kids. Obviously, that's later explained that they were adopted because of a tragedy involved. And yeah, and then as they would introduce, and then like I said, at the end of the episode, the guy who was originally revealed, I like that they took a little bit of time, even though they kind of already told you that this was Ozymandias, the guy who was later revealed to be kind of in a world of his own, Jeremy Irons as Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias. And if we could just talk about that for a second, because you harped on it for a little bit. Now I'm going to get my turn. Watching him at first, I had a little bit of a problem because I thought his accent was going to throw me off because I've seen a lot of British actors do some spot-on American accents to the point where I can't even tell they're British. Jeremy Irons is not quite one of those guys. He does his best, but at best you're hearing just like kind of a fanciful, artificial take on an American accent where it's like, I know if I heard this in real life, I would never once believe this. But he just engrosses you with his performance because he's given me, for me, what I was totally missing from the Watchmen movie, where one of the biggest things that helped anchor the Watchmen movie for me was how fucking perfect they nailed almost all the cast members. To me, again, there's 6 primary characters in the original Watchmen, and 4 of them I think they cast amazingly well to a T. I love Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach. To me, that's one of the best superhero castings I've ever seen on screen. I love Jeffrey Dean Morgan as the comedian. I love Billy Crudup as Dr. Manhattan, and I love Patrick Wilson as Night Owl. Can't fucking stand Malin Ackerman or Matthew Good as Silk Spectre and Ozymandias. But Jeremy Irons in this show, seeing a much older Ozymandias, gives me, because he's not even playing the same character that I knew reading in the comic and watching in the movie. He gives me something that is so vastly different, but he gives me everything that I was missing. The thing that made me fall in love with Adrian at first in the comic, the thing that gets you so invested in him is the fact that he seems to be at least, the most stable and the most likable out of all of them, which is probably why he's given the least amount of screen time, but you see my point.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So with all that being said, going back to like how you place like individual characters, like to me, the characters of Judd Crawford, portrayed by Don Johnson, and later on who was revealed to be Angela's grandfather, Will Abar, portrayed by Louis Gossett Jr., are to me kind of both simultaneously fulfill the roles of the comedian in different ways. Dr. Manhattan obviously is revealed to have a part in the show, but for a majority of the show's run, you don't even know that he's going to be in it. The Lady Trieu character is very clearly supposed to be Ozymandias, as is revealed near the end of the show. She has a direct connection to him. They bring back the original Laurie Blake, portrayed by Jean Smart, which again, I'll get into that in a little bit, why I think that's brilliant casting right there. But again, for a majority of it, for me, and again, the thing that made me enjoy Angela so much and Regina King's performance is seeing that. I feel like, again, similar to what I got with Jeremy Irons as Ozymandias, I feel like I was getting what I was missing from Silk Spectre, which again is kind of an addition to the original Silk Spectre character, because the Silk Spectre character in the comics is a very unlikable, shallow character to begin with, because she's supposed to be a portrayal of all of the negative elements that afflict so many female superheroes in typical superheroes fashion. But by doing that, he kind of pulled a Moana in that he was just kind of embodying all of the tropes that he was trying to deconstruct, which kind of made Laurie kind of a damsel in distress that really, if you think about it, didn't contribute a whole lot to the story. She's a very passive character that shit kind of just happens to. And so seeing both her, the original character of Laurie, now taking her dad's last name, Blake, as opposed to her mom's last name, Jupiter, take a more active role, but also see Angela kind of as her successor in a way, that was refreshing in and of itself. And then rounding it out, you got Tim Blake Nelson as Looking Glass, who is introduced as a mysterious character, but then you get a big focus on midway through the season is, for me at least, our new Rorschach, albeit a lot more mentally stable.
Yeah, no, so I couldn't agree more with like the casting, really, because we could talk all day about the filmmaking and the expertise behind the craft and the set design, but I think that would be a disservice to really dive into that. Not saying that wasn't incredible. I mean, it all has to work together to make this show something that we're both so in love with, but at the end of the day, I mean, this is very much, and as most superhero titles are, it's about the characters. And specifically when you see them go from the comic to the screen, it's about the embodiment of the characters and the way that those characters are brought to life. And now I can't speak to the original movie because, like I said, my memory of that's a bit foggy, but what I can say is, as someone who's read the comic twice and someone who's now seen the television show once, I almost like the TV show more than the comic, although I know the comic is legendary literature, and so I'm going to say that that's a little bit of like the buzz that I'm riding, the high that I'm riding right now, having just completed the television show. But I mean, at the end of the day, they both hold water equally, and I gotta say, man, like it's amazing to see how this cast brought these characters to life, specifically Regina King. I mean, God damn, what a performance. She was put through the ringer in this entirety of the show, you know, and we got to watch sort of like the story from her eyes for the most part. I mean, of course, you had the one episode with Looking Glass, which I thought was amazing. He was my second favorite performance in the entirety of the show.
It hurt me that was my favorite episode, hands down, and then it got followed up by the wallow-up that was episode 6. And I'm like, motherfucker, it's one of the first times ever where I'm like, the show is for once topping itself with every subsequent episode, and I'm pissed because it constantly takes away. It's like, damn it, I want to make up my mind in terms of what's absolutely the best.
Well, let's dissect that. What are your thoughts about season 6? Because I wouldn't call it a
episode 6.
I mean, episode 6. It definitely hit like a slight lull. But why would you use the word like wallow up or you know how you just described
well, just because the whole thing of like I was so wowed by episode 5 and what it did. And then I see episode 6, it's just because episode 5, I feel like, is where it really hits. Because it's 2 through 4, it's kind of continuing, introducing other characters, and still kind of building upon the mystery, and you really don't start to unravel it. Again, very much like the comic, you know, the first 3 comics, literally to the point where the most interesting thing about, like, the second or third chapter is the fact that it's all exposition, but it's done through brilliant flashback, where the whole thing is at the comedian's funeral. You're seeing flashbacks from Dr. Manhattan, Ozymandias, and Night Owl with each of their different individual interactions with the comedian, which also simultaneously helps flesh him out as a character who you're literally introduced to, and kicks off the comic with his death. So even that is brilliant in and of itself, but back to your original point about episode 6
but what I will say is like episode 5 tipped the scales. So we had the setup, which was expertly done. It was exposition in such a way that you didn't feel like you were getting exposition. It was just the perfect amount of setup, because if you didn't have context from the comics, it's okay. At the end of episode 4, you weren't lost. You realized, okay, game on. This is a different version of Watchmen we haven't seen yet. And so episode 5, something needed to happen, and it did, and I thought that's what they did right. But I also liked how episode 6, right, correct me if I'm wrong, because you know I get things confused, that's when she takes the pills,
the nostalgia
and sort of
pills, and she goes through her grandfather's memories, and you see, in another brilliant facet, again, kind of mirroring what I like so much about the comedian flashback. Not only that, but also later on, the flashback reveal, because this is the section from the comic that the show was emulating, again, kind of how it's borrowing from the structure. The section in the comic and the movie where Dr. Manhattan and Laurie are on Mars, and he's sifting through her memories as she's trying to convince him to come back and save everyone, and through that sifting, she ends up discovering that the comedian is her father. Through a second consensual sexual encounter between the comedian and her mom. And so how that mimics it is that Angela, again, is learning the history of her grandfather, learning the history of her lineage, kind of, and where she comes from in a way. And besides the fact that, again, the beautiful way it's shot, I love throwbacks to 40s noir, but I'll tell you the other double whammy that the comic, and this is where we're going really deep cut with the comic. This is the stuff that you find out by reading the in-between sections, in between each chapter.
Nerd alert.
Is you get an origin for a superhero that you didn't even know you wanted, but if you thought about it, literally answered the only loose hole, unanswered question from the comic, which is, it is revealed that her grandfather, Will Reeves, is Hooded Justice. Mm-hmm. The original founding member, not only the original founding member of the Minutemen, which were the first superhero organization in this world, but the first ever who inspired them, who literally got this whole wave of superheroes started.
And so that's why...
and all of it still beautifully ties in with the theme overall of racism in America and what it has become.
And so then I have a question for you, because with that being said, I thought that this was perfect placement episode 6 couldn't have come at a better time.
Seriously.
Because of what you see the characters come through after that. So with that being said, and kind of like how we just talked about it, do you still feel that like episode 6 sort of took a step back? Because I think you needed
not at all.
it.
If anything, that's what enhanced it to me. Because again, I'm going in deep hard as a comic book nerd, and again, because the whole thing is I still haven't even decided what my favorite episode is of the season. I don't even know if I want it, because for me it's a three-way tie between 5, 6, and 8. 7 comes close, but looking at 7 and realizing how that was building up to 8 and what we got there, and 8 just as an example of writing. Forget television, forget movies, just an example of writing in general. What that does is beyond anything else I feel like I've seen this year.
Now, one of the things that if we're talking about the cast and all that, and the performances, they have a lot to manage doing this type of show, and there's a lot of source material that if you're going to build upon and sort of like get the blessing to create on a very legendary IP, right? Like we spoke about the fact that this comic book is being taught in institutions, right? Like this is a no joke comic book. It's more than a comic book, okay? It's a legendary piece of literature in modern literature. And so with that being said, you have heavy shoes to fill. So you better make sure that everything is calculated, everything is precise, and more importantly, every character has a purpose. And I think for the most part, they all serve their purpose, especially, and I think we should move now to almost being a little over halfway through this. We're sort of like working through. We've talked about the beginning. We've talked a little bit about the middle, but I was waiting for every character to sort of get their moment and have their role in the ending of this series. And I thought that for me personally, there wasn't really a mistake that comes to mind. And I honestly thought that everyone got the perfect amount of screen time while still being predominantly centered around our main character, Regina King. And so, Dom, am I just drinking the Kool-Aid too much, or is it okay for me to just like not really have a bad thing to say about the way they wrap this show up?
And that's fine, because it's funny that you mentioned that, because
I feel like this isn't me.
It's funny. Because it's the most positive I think you've been about anything on this podcast since we started. But just kind of backtracking a little bit and how it factors in, I famously said that episode 9, after I watched it and finished it, I was like, okay. I wasn't quite sure. It was probably the closest that I had to feeling about the first 3 episodes since then, because like I said, I'd been on that train of episodes 5 through 8 to me are like perfect, almost damn near perfect as far as like a consistent trek of like amazement. Episode 3 was kind of what launched that, but you had a little bit of the backdrop of episode 4, which I felt like was really the last explaining things episode that we had to go through.
I agree.
Also, the fact that episode 3 still has the only unresolved thing on screen from the entire show happen on, which is the mysterious lube man, although that is revealed, of course, to be Agent Dale Petey, but that's not revealed on the show. Yep, Peteypedia. But so the whole thing is that when the show ended and how it wrapped everything up, the whole thing is that, okay, the way it's wrapping everything up, there's a lot of answers that I was kind of already able to figure out, and it is definitely kind of the most explanation heavy. But 2 things that stop me from saying, okay, this is just blatantly a bad episode. Number 1, that's exactly how the comic book ended, because the comic is literally, and again, how it works is the last act is primarily monologue. It's literally, no, not primarily. It is literally a monologue where after Night Owl and Rorschach infiltrate Ozymandias' base, he kicks their asses easily. What's it called? Again, it makes a little bit more sense in the comic, but it's cool as fuck to watch in the movie, even though
he's younger.
No, not just that. It's just how it's choreographed and how they fight in the movie. It makes no goddamn sense. Rorschach charges him and he literally flies up in the air. Rorschach goes headfirst into the bottom of all those TVs. He lands magically and he fucking just whips around and throws a fucking armed like a big ass cabinet right at Night Owl, chucks him in. Somehow Night Owl doesn't have a fucking broken shoulder and 3 ribs. You know,
again, problems people have with the movie.
Just the logistics. Again, really nitpicking here, but. And then goes on like a 20-minute monologue explaining not only everything, it's way worse, it's extensive enough in the movie, but it's so much more so in the comic. Literally explaining away his plan. But again, how that works so brilliantly is because the whole thing is that, again, the whole trope, literally, again, Alan Moore was covering this in the 80s before most people in pop culture were making fun of it, before Austin Powers even got a chance to cover it. The villain explaining their plan, therefore giving the heroes a chance to foil it.
You're not going to explain to me your fucking plan, are you?
Exactly. And he's like, no, why the fuck would I do that? I already did it. You think I would have told you my whole plan? Again, he even says, he's like, you think I would have told you my plan if you had any chance of stopping it? I told you that shit fucking half an hour ago. Yeah, and, before we see his ultimate plan. But it pulls a little bit of that. It doesn't quite do that. But it is, I would feel like the most explanation heavy in terms of compared to the previous episodes. But how it wraps everything up and how it like infuses and lets each character play their part while again continuing from the comic, because exactly like how the comic ended, in a way, even though it's a completely foolish madcap plan that requires a lot of sacrifice, well, not as much sacrifice as the first time around, but Ozymandias still ends up coming in and saved the day. And how, I'll tell you what else.
He was kind of just like, I guess I'll do it again.
Pretty much. Well, not guess, it was more so a matter of like competition because Adrian.
Well, I guess he rose to the occasion,
because
but
Adrian's ego comes before all else. The only reason why he wanted to save the world, his primary motivating factor was because he could, was because he was convinced
the credit and,
he was the only person that he could. And on top of the fact, let me tell you something, beating out a god, a fucking god in terms of being the savior of the world. Definitely, will do a lot for a man's ego, especially a man who has already christened himself the smartest man on the planet.
I like that, beating out the god. I like that you brought that up because for all that we see that is good from Dr. Manhattan,
there's still just as much wrong.
He like, the thing that I find so compelling about his character is the fact that, yes, he's a god, but I think that if he was given the choice, he would never have taken that mantle because he, as they say multiple times, he didn't do enough. Because he seems to me like someone who sort of like stumbles into the throne, or someone who sort of stumbles into a situation and they're in it now and they have to work with what they're given because, well, what else can you do? But to me, it seems like his powers were sort of wasted on him in the sense that he could have been doing more. And he was falling in love and living the life of a mortal, and he wanted to be mortal, but yet he had the ability to be so much more. So I thought it was a really interesting dichotomy, especially when you put that right up against Adrian, Ozymandias, who clearly wishes he could be like Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, we wishes he could be Dr. Manhattan.
And so that's one of the most compelling things about this show to me.
I love that you brought that up. Because that is literally something that has been brought up so many different times to me, and I never really thought about it this way either, but when you think about it, it's like, yeah, it's funny, I literally made this as a joke to my comic book professor when we were reading Watchmen, when we got to the Manhattan chapter. I think this is chapter 4 where he's on Mars and you're seeing his entire past, but you're seeing it how he sees it floating through fragments of time, but it's still told so compellingly. It's one of the most compelling nonlinear stories I've ever seen told. And literally, I made this joke to my professor where I'm like, yeah, Dr. Manhattan is indecisive. He has all this power, but he doesn't know what to do with it, and he just wants to sit and contemplate it rather than actually taking any action. Dr. Manhattan's not a god. He's a fucking millennial. And, like, I made that joke.
Oh, my God. You cracked the goddamn code. Alan Moore was so ahead of his time.
Now that I think about it, and now that I'm seeing it in a different capacity, because don't get me wrong, I love Billy Crudup's performance, but Billy Crudup definitely does hesitate a little. Billy Crudup's performance in the movie does hesitate a little bit more so on lofty and ethereal, which is a trait that is used to portray a lot of godly figures in media. But what I like about, again, spoilers, Yaya's performance, because as it is revealed in episode, and at the end of episode 7 and throughout episode 8, Angela Abar's husband, Cal, is revealed to be Dr. Manhattan in disguise, as he chose to live as a mortal after he randomly asked her out on a date, back in the late 2000s.
Playing games as a god, going on dates as a god.
As is introduced in episode 8, titled, A God Walks Into a Bar, but, it's spelled, A-bar. Anyways, wordplay. But,
which, again, can I just, because I want you to keep going, but, like, so we really don't get Dr. Manhattan as we know him until about episode 8 in his full form, in his blue form, superhero powered god mode form. And so, they had to address that in a way where they're introducing something new to what is, speculated to be a limited series to the very end.
Hopefully.
Coming close. We'll talk about that in a minute here too. Coming close to the end of the finale, you have to introduce a whole new level, a whole new layer of world building.
Your penultimate episode.
You're in your penultimate episode. You have to now introduce.
You got to answer everything and pay it off in the biggest ways, usually, especially if you're HBO.
A new player who can do things exactly with time and space that we have not seen yet in this show. So we've established everything up until this point, and then you add something like
that we haven't seen yet.
Right. That's true. But I'm just, I'm talking about where we're at in episode 8 that we know of. And so I gotta say that we could have easily had another Lindelof Lost thing where season 6 of Lost introduces so much that was not answered. I know you haven't seen it, but that is what happened for the most part.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, it's funny that you mentioned it because I actually do want to bring it back to Lost and how, in a way, episode 8 actually was capitalizing on his biggest missed opportunity that everybody missed in Lost, but
so you would think, you would start to get nervous and sweat in your seat a little bit because you've just been enjoying this ride so much until now. But if you're a Lindelof guy like I am, you know things go wrong, and you don't want to see them go wrong in this. And so they did such an amazing job of explaining his powers, the way that he perceives time and space as opposed to her, and just there was no confusion. Like, there was nothing left on the floor in this show.
It's one of the
every step of the way, you needed to think and use your brain because it wasn't told to you. But if you looked for the clues and if you paid attention, you were rewarded with time and care. TLC.
It's one of those shows where where you have to be paying attention because it's the type of show that will reward you for that. And so going back to Manhattan and how he's introduced and everything, one of the things that I've always loved about Dr. Manhattan is, like you said, the fact of he literally is the idea of the perfect hero, and that it's literally the gift of immortality and godhood, literally being able to bend space and time to his will, pretty much, teleporting, anything that comes with pretty much omnipotence, gifted to a man who, quite frankly, again, would be the last person you would expect. A German immigrant, son of a watchmaker, who pushed him into quantum physics because that was what the direction that he saw the world going in. Regular family man, met who he thought was going to be the love of his life. Then this horrific accident happens. Everybody thinks he's dead. Next thing you know, he reappears as a god. No longer is John Osterman. It's Dr. Manhattan. And Moore pulls a very interesting thing in that, with Manhattan, what he chooses to do is he chooses to take the idea of what if Superman just got tired? Not if Superman went evil, not if Superman, all that other bullshit. What if Superman just got tired and was sick? What if Superman, if you had the ability to literally hear everybody's cries on Earth and know that even with all your power, literally being able to see time simultaneously, like past, present, and future, all happening at once, which already sounds like an absolute burden. Imagining just being able to think, contributing, again, pushing your entire species forward three decades worth, because they have flying cars in the 80s, as electric cars introduced in the 80s. Again, that's a whole contributor as to why Night Owl, a big contributor as to why the second Night Owl retired. But but you're still a regular human being underneath all that, and you're still in love, and you still want to bang girls, fucking, again, he's still a human being. He goes for, but again, because it's all that expectation, you have that expectation of godhood on you, and so it crushes you to the point where when you see Dr. Manhattan 30 years after the ending of Watchmen, when he claimed that he was going to go off and create life and that he had been inspired to change, where do you see him? Back fucking around, just wanted to go back to being a regular guy. And this time it cost him. But what I like about it and how they perceive it is, besides Lindelof's overall just understanding of the character, he pulls in episode 8 again. How the fuck he pulls this off, I have no idea. But episode 8, like I said, episode 8, that's the penultimate episode. Usually, at least from what I've seen in a lot of HBO shows, their penultimate episode, 11th episode if it's a 12 episode run, 9th episode if it's a 10 episode run, whatever. We've gone to Game of Thrones is probably the best example.
We know the
format where episode 9 is your gangbusters episode where all your shit happens, all pieces are in place, and then whatever happens in the finale happens. Whether that's a fight or a build up to a fight or a fight, and then you see the aftermath of it, whatever the case is. And what he does here is obviously, again, compounding multiple things into one and having it flow so smoothly and naturally, basically telling us Angela and Manhattan, basically how Angela met Dr. Manhattan and how they fell in love, but presenting it in a manner that, again, how it goes back to the comic, emulates the Manhattan origin chapter in chapter 4, where you're seeing time simultaneously and you're bouncing around with him. And not only that would be crazy enough and awesome enough and make this episode great enough as that was, but it ties everything together by literally using the very paradoxical nature of Dr. Manhattan. They make him the linchpin that simultaneously both wraps up and starts the show at once, because by communicating with Angela, communicating with her grandfather, Will, back in 2008 or whenever it is that Dr. Manhattan goes to visit him, just because he's drifting around and because he can't focus on one thing, she unintentionally incites the incidents of the entire thing by alerting Will to the fact that the 7th Cavalry, or as we learned in episode 6, Cyclops, as it originated, apparently the originator of all evil in this world, is still active and is back on the warpath, and that the 7th Cavalry is just the new form of Cyclops. And how that goes into the origin of how we were led to believe this was the origin of the 7th Cavalry, and then it turns out, no, it's got ties going back to even before the Minutemen.
Yeah.
Back to the guy who put the original Watchmen out of business.
I thought to further accent our point of life is what you make of it. And I think one thing to keep in mind is none of us asked to be born, right? We were just sort of born. We didn't really have a say in the matter. So if you're born like Dr. Manhattan was, like everyone was, and you have all these gifts, he didn't ever ask to have all these gifts. So I think that the fact that him being so all over the place and so not on top of his situation in that scene where she starts it through him, sending the message, telling him that he has the KKK costume in his closet.
Just ask him how he knew about the KKK closet, and he's like, who the fuck is this guy?
It just further accents that dichotomy, that point I'm trying to make about how compelling Dr. Manhattan is, because at the end of the day, he's just as flawed as us, just in a different way.
Probably even more so, because he's got the curse of godhood on him. And what I like about it is that it even expanded upon my previous theory that it came to about it. I joked about him being a millennial, but seeing him, especially in that last episode when they've got him captured in that cage, I'm like, he looks like a kid. He literally looks like a child, and that's kind of in a way what he's been reduced to.
He didn't even fight it. He didn't even fight it. Yeah. He just didn't know what was going on. Because he didn't know what
to do.
Exactly.
He literally looked like a scared little kid, to the point where his literal last words were, "I don't want to die alone."
And that was beautiful.
That was beautiful.
Now, with that being said, I think since we just touched upon last words, sort of like getting close to wrapping this up, I think that the last words of this show, I'm just speaking a little metaphorically here, like the last sequences, the way they wrap this up, as much as I want another season, as much as I selfishly would love for that to happen, please preserve what you created here. Do not fall victim to what we've seen happen so many times, which is why I feel like I come off as such a bitter person on this podcast, but it's because you have struck gold here, and we both agree, right? We would hate to see this thing hit a second season.
Age-old problem of what happens when you get gangbusters. I've said this. I've said this in comments. I've said this a million times. Take the easy money or take the hard choice. And the problem is most people, when they strike the iron, they with something this hot, they usually go for the easy money. And most of the time, again, it's great for their careers and themselves personally, but for their art. Again, we've seen that happen a lot of times. And
if they need us to accent this point with a different property, just go and check our Stranger Things episode.
Seriously,
right?
Literally.
Seriously.
No, I could, yeah.
And I'm not just trying to do he's gonna plug and all that. No, because we spoke about that so much on that episode, and I think this is even higher stakes because this is so much more well done than that show. I think
but the other thing too, to kind of bounce off that point, is that this is kind of a win-win in both situations, because Lindelof already said the whole thing that he said was. Because he said this a few times. The whole thing that he said, and I like what he said because he was very smart about his word choice in all the interviews pre the show, is that because everybody, of course, was already asking him about season 2, before the show had even started. I think at the pilot,
he was like, "It's Watchmen."
Yeah, and he was like, "I don't know." He was very specific with those words. He said, "I don't know about season 2." He said the whole thing was that he wanted it to be self-contained, similar to the original comic, but he wouldn't necessarily say no immediately to season 2. And the whole thing that he's saying now is he's sitting down with the directors and the writers, and he's saying, okay, let's consider this and do season 2. And of course the cast wants to do a season 2, but that's not news.
Of course,
the cast,
and they were so good.
Yeah.
They deserve
it helped
but
that for once they were probably doing a job that was more than just a paycheck, that they could actually contribute something to. But
still probably being a nice paycheck. But I know exactly what you mean.
But how this is a win-win is, Lindelof is not a stranger to this situation. He's a pro. He's an old pro when it comes to television, and he's an old pro of having to deal.
He's a victim almost of this situation.
Literally a veteran. And to the point where we know about his initial struggles with Lost, with the fact that he wanted less episodes, and the studios forced the 25 episode count on him, which is kind of what dragged down Lost and made it a little bit of a ratings plummet in the
Thank
first
God
half.
for the writer's strike. I mean, that's the only reason we got the 15 episode seasons. But.
So with that, there's that going for him. But it's also a situation of where, regardless of whether he does season 2 or not, he's getting offers from studios, regardless, Yeah. And HBO, even if he says no, I think this is their hottest button property they've had so far since Game of Thrones ended, and they're not letting a thing like this go to waste. So regardless of whether he's on or not, I think there will be a season 2.
You know what I could go for? I could go for a Minutemen show. Bring us in the past.
Which is funny because we're kind of already getting that, which again is just kind of them with Damon Lindelof kind of sticking up a middle finger at Ryan Murphy, which I love. And to the point where he even uses an actor that's popped up in the last couple seasons of American Horror Story to play that version of Hooded Justice, which is hilarious to me.
But it's just
oh my God.
Because they left some cliffhangers and some open-ended ways you could take it, but to me, if that's a foundation they're building off of, no thank you. I'm going to be upset if they announce it off of that, because I think it was the perfect amount of thought to be left out there for speculation. And I think we need to learn how to just enjoy when something has run its course.
Yes.
Because a creator like this, I think, who now has, I hope, finally found his footing after some great success, also some great criticism, right? We're no stranger to his career, both you and I. And so I feel like this is a creator who's in the peak of his career, and so let's not worry, guys. I feel like, I mean, I'm willing to put money down on that. If Watchmen isn't the next thing he does, he's certainly capable of giving you the same effect, the same level of show. So I just think, like, in this whole fan servicey, we can tweet at our creators now. We can DM our creators on Instagram now. Sometimes you got to let things go, because if you truly enjoy this, let him decide. And whatever we get, all I ask is for you to think about the fact of what we're saying is that we might not look at Stranger Things, okay? Just look at Stranger Things, right? We love that first season, and we can't. I think you and I can both say,
legitimately great season. I will still go back and defend the first season of Stranger Things as being
man.
legitimately a great season of television.
And good things have come from it since, but it's like, would it have been stronger if it was just left alone to grow and live in speculation? You'll never know the answer. I'm on the team. I'm on the side of saying yes. Yes, it would have.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because kind of to bounce off of that with the season 2 point is that of all the people and all the creators who I was looking forward to future projects from, Damon Lindelof was the last person that I would have expected. But let me tell you something. After what he pulled off with this show, and I'm very impressed. I want to give a shout out to all of the writers and directors that he got from that. Nicole Cassell is a name that I saw pop up multiple times. Frederick E.O. Toyne, who I know is the guy who directed the finale. And again, I'm pissed that I'm not remembering all the writers and creators, but seriously, fucking A for being able to pull this off. This was like legitimately one of the few things that I've seen this year that like actually made me like excited and like actually like joyful for the future of cinema and what we're gonna get content wise. But yeah, I am actually really looking forward to whatever it is that Lindelof puts his name to next, whether it be a TV show or a movie. But yeah, so kind of before we do our star system, before we rate this overall season of television. Well, closing statements, but I actually wanted to ask you something, because we really haven't done this. You know, again, it's a new show, you know, so I feel like we can do this. Favorite character so far? If you had to pick one. And that's tough, because again,
character so far, and we're not talking about like performance, right? We're talking about
performance can factor in, but I'm talking the character, not the actor, in terms of your favorite. But performance can factor in.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go with. I think I jokingly want to say Panda or Red Scare, because I would really have loved...
because you want to know more, because they play it as fast as the world, and I know how much you love that shit.
Well, because they were scene stealers, in my opinion. Scene stealers, sorry. And so because of that, I would love to see them further explored, and that's what gives me somewhat hope for taking this in different directions without it being a clear season 2 title brand, if you will, imprint. But my favorite character is Looking Glass, because that depth of taking this hillbilly and this like southern guy who's, you know, sort of like has that like typical stern southernness, who he's like so in his way, and he's so like set, and he has that humble southern pride, but he's also like, you know, been through a lot. But the way he took your generic sort of like southern character who's like on law enforcement and added levels and layers of depth, just like through the facial expressions and like being like just not your typical generic southern white man character that we've seen who's been in a shitty situation. I give him hats off to that, because he you know, he was like, he had a hard role to fill, I think. And especially with all the other great performances around him.
And shout out to Tim Blake Nelson also, who I feel like has been having a steady pickup after almost a decade and a half of bit part character parts.
Who did he play again?
That's Looking Glass.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know me, guys. I'm not familiar
what's
with
his name? Mr. Pendansky from
because I was nervous.
Holes. What else? Fucking, he was in Ballad of Buster Scruggs last year.
Okay.
The leader in the Incredible Hulk. Again, he's in a Marvel movie. He's the leader in the Incredible Hulk movie with Edward Norton.
I was nervous when he got his own episode, because I was like, how can you take this character who's kind of like a little more on like the generic side as of now, and really give me a compelling narrative, and then goddamn what we got was a ride.
Goddamn if they didn't prove us wrong. And again, it's because the whole thing is of all the origin chapters from Watchmen that this shows to emulate. I'm not gonna lie, Rorschach's is probably my least favorite. I love it still, but the whole thing is, to me, it's the only origin chapter that doesn't really add anything new, that kind of adds a new layer. It's the only one that really kind of just gives an explanation, because everything with Rorschach you kind of get up front and foremost. The other characters, it's revealed more so onward. So when we were on, like I said, because Looking Glass is the Rorschach character for me for this show, when we got to the origin, I was a little bit worried, but then when it started, and I realized what was about to happen, and I already knew the setting, but the characters it started with in his solo episode, I was a little bit thrown off first, and then it took me a few seconds, but once I realized it, I'm like, oh shit, and then I realized where they were, and the date it was, and when they said the date, I'm like, oh fuck! And once I realized what was about to happen, and how that would tie in, and how they made it, I'm like, okay, so his Rorschach event, his traumatizing thing that sent him over the edge, was fucking the squid explosion from the end of the comic. And I'm like, holy fuck!
I'm right there with you on that. So now, can I ask you?
Yes.
Who is your favorite
So
character?
it's funny that you mentioned that, because it was originally going to be Looking Glass. It was going to be Looking Glass. That was my first choice. But
changed my mind.
After watching episode 5, I'm like, he's an easy character to love. Because, again, they take the Rorschach example. I could have gone Dr. Manhattan, but again, Dr. Manhattan, it's kind of the same reasons why I love him here as why I love him in the comics, so it's not anything there.
That was my number 2 for
Judd, weirdly enough, I actually did enjoy a lot, especially for what they did with him, both using him as the comedian character and that his murder in the first episode is the setup for the trajectory of the show, but also just what they do with him and how even for somebody who's supposed to be a racist character, they kind of take the opposite approach, and that he really just kind of just is this sweet, like, retired old guy who's, like, kind of way past his prime, like, to the point where he's still doing cocaine and, like, his almost 70s. But no, this is gonna shock you. Adrian comes close. Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias comes close. Yeah. Because of, like I said, because of what Jeremy Irons does to that performance, that like I said, gives me what I was missing from Ozymandias in the movie. But I'm going Will Reeves, Louis Gossett Jr. Besides the fact of getting a veteran in there, old school veteran, and just have him again knock his socks off. He doesn't have many. Louis Gossett Jr. is actual screen time. He doesn't have that many scenes, and his scenes are all great. But fucking that origin episode, where literally, no joke, and this is going to make you laugh. Like I said, the episode was brilliant enough as it was, with everything that it was going for, but giving me and the origin of a character who, I didn't even really give a shit about. Literally, the most notable thing that Hooded Justice is known for in the comic is he's the only guy that when the comedian attempts to rape the first Silk Spectre for the first time, he pulls him off of her and starts beating the shit out of him, to the point where it's like, what's it called? To the point where the comedian literally insults, like, his homosexuality as a result of it. But giving me an origin for a character that I didn't even know I wanted, and completely surprising me out of left field, where I'm watching, I'm like, okay, this is cool learning his origin and the origin of Cyclops and everything, but once the lynching happens, and once you see the mugging happens, and I see the Hood, I'm like, and again, it was the Looking Glass moment for me in the previous episode, where I'm like, holy fuck, this is we're watching Hooded Justice's origin story. And again, how that tied back in with everything, and just how it provides so much layers. And also, fucking shout out, you were giving a shout out to Tim Blake Nelson, shout out to motherfucking Hove on a Dapo, the kid from Fences that Denzel was yelling at, playing young Will Reeves as a total badass. Again, impressed the fuck out of me last year in a movie that I was not expecting to enjoy, Overlord, and completely crushing it as young Will Reeves here, blending fully into that setting, bouncing off of the fucking smarky asshole from Shameless as Captain Metropolis. The only thing I'll say about that episode that for me was the one that I didn't like, his homosexuality. I will say that is the only moment in that episode that feels, okay, this is only thrown in because this was in the comic, because we know this is an element of his character from the comic, you know? But that was it. That was a small gripe. Okay. And yeah.
And if that's your gripe,
so yeah, Will is my favorite character.
If that's your gripe, I think that it's time to move on to ratings, because I'm curious to see if that's like one of your only gripes, like what kind of star rating this gets. So Dom, I mean, I gotta
go first. You gotta go first.
I gotta go first.
You gotta wind me up for this.
All right. So I guess like a closing statement is, when I can hear something sonically and I know it's Trent Reznor before I look it up afterwards.
Shit, I forgot we didn't even talk about the score.
And I'm not only like happy that it's Trent Reznor, but I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm even locked in from an audio standpoint. I can't take my ears off this screen, let alone my eyes. You just know you got something special on your hands. And so I think, like, man, what do you think about I don't want to be that guy that gives it 5 out of 5, but I'm gonna say it came close, 4 out of 5, because it wasn't perfect. But for me, this was goddamn the best television show I've seen in a very long time, since Leftovers. I'm putting my money on that as my show of the decade, being Leftovers. If this would have come out with like maybe a year or two more to simmer on it, who knows what would have been my show of the decade.
But so it's funny that you mentioned that, because like I said, I've talked before on the show about imperfections, certainly, and how as I'm going forward and how as I've matured in my movie watching over the years, and I've come to appreciate imperfections in things a lot more. Like I said, I want to distinguish first the difference between an imperfection and a critique. A critique is a legitimate problem that makes something within the final product not work, whether it be a narrative flaw that was overlooked, whether it be just a simple flaw, it could be anything, right? An imperfection is something that may not necessarily work for the vast majority, but there is at the very least a reason for why it's in there, and it's something that I can at the very least appreciate, even if I don't agree with or enjoy the choice that is made. And so even with all the imperfections, like I said, I had a few. Jeremy Irons' accent, Will's homosexuality, the Lady Trieu character kind of overall, and her whole origin. That's the only thing, again, where it's like, I'm not a huge fan of this, but it's wacky and it works. So sure, and again, her overall plan, but again, how that factored in again with going back to Ozymandias' whole thing.
I'm with you so far. I'm with you.
Yeah, with how she is kind of the ambivalent, where he kind of as an older man learned from his ways and wasn't nearly as egotistical as he used to be when he was younger. Younger Ozymandias would have jumped at a chance to become Dr. Manhattan, to the point where now his daughter that he didn't even know existed, now is in a position to enact the thing that he refused to do 30 years ago. And, but how all of that builds into it. And how, again, what Lindelof managed to pull off. Again, a sequel, a remake, a reconstruction, a deconstruction, whatever you want to call it.
And those both work.
Yeah. Is it a miniseries? Is it a continuing series? Is it cinema? Who the fuck knows? Is it new cinema? Who the fuck knows? But for all of those reasons, because this to me is something that truly pushes whatever the fuck we want to call this crazy movement of moving pictures on a screen forward. That for me, I am safe to say, I couldn't even give a 5-star rating to any fucking movie that I saw this year. Not even new Tarantino and Safdie brothers, but to me, God damn it, Chris, this is the first fucking 5-star thing I've seen all year. 5 out of 5 stars. Fuck it. That is the Movie Nerd Review's official rating for Watchmen.
Okay.
Yeah, I said it.
And with that being said, guys, if you want to hear more great conversations like this one, Dom, before we tell them where they can find us, why don't you tell them what's on the horizon? Because I want to let them know that we're about to go watch the first few episodes of Witcher right after we do this podcast.
Yes, definitely. So we are about to watch the first few episodes of Witcher, but we've also got, unfortunately, by the time this episode comes out, I believe there will be only one weekend left in 2019 before we hit the new year. So I can definitely say that next week's episode, we will be wrapping up and discussing The Mandalorian, but who knows? There could be some extra bonuses at the end of that episode. But in terms of
Christmas,
some things to look forward
to
on the horizon, in terms of what you could look forward to for next year, for the beginning of 2020, let's just say, can you guys count? That's the only hint that I'm gonna give, because I don't want to spoil it. I want to keep the suspense going a little bit for going into 2020. if you know what I mean.
But if we can put like a
can you see
specific,
2020?
I mean, we're gonna be talking Mr. Robot. We're gonna be talking
Mr.
BoJack
Robot,
Horseman. We're gonna be talking The Witcher.
Wrapping up a few TV, final seasons of TV shows, because there's a lot of TV shows that ended in 2019. I didn't realize that. There's 6 or 7 major shows that I've been following for the last couple of years. I didn't even think about it. I'm like, holy shit, they're over.
And with that being said, that's a little bit of what's coming up on the way. BoJack, The Witcher, Mr. Robot, to name a few of these gangbuster episodes we got planned for you. And where you can find that, Dom, tell them where they can find that everywhere that matters at
Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the other stuff that I can never remember.
And what do they type in on those services to find that?
Talkin with no G TV podcast, or Talkin TV, depending on the name. It changes depending on the site.
Yeah, Talkin TV, guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.
Big neon logo. It's kind of hard to miss.
I am Christian Ivanko, at Christian Ivanko, everywhere that matters on social media. I make music. I make podcasts. You guys give me your ears every week, and I appreciate that so much. If I don't speak to you or hear from you before that, I want you guys to have a great, happy holiday season. Thank you for, giving this show a chance. We have a surprisingly overwhelming amount of views, and you know what? Thank you. That's the best gift I can get all holiday season.
Seriously.
So I just want to, I'm gonna hand it over to my main man Dom here, but thank you.
I have been Dominic Rizzi, and I always will be the Movie Nerd. Follow me on everything at Movie Nerd Reviews, or on the Instagram at Talkin TV.
And I want you to hear these next words Dom says, because they're important.
Last few words. Watch more fucking movies. And in this case, we out.
Happy holidays.